Hello Proponomics people, and welcome to the 4 pillars of property investment video. And today's video is about joint ventures. So remember, the 4 pillars is a strategic framework that I've come up with and evolved over the years. And we're still on my first pillar, which is the supply pipeline, or in plain English, where do you get your deals from? And remember, each pillar is then split into 7 sub-pillars, 3 of which are supposed to be easy, accessible, entry level. You can do them from day one in property. Realistically, they're available to all of us. And then 4 sub-pillars that are slightly more advanced, and I don't recommend getting into immediately or as your first thing that you attempt to do in property. And we're on to the more advanced sub-pillars of the supply pipeline pillar, and this one is joint ventures, as I say. So I don't think joint ventures is something you can do from day one in property. I think it's something that you need to have practiced a little bit, to have worked on quite a bit before you get on with it. So JVs, what does it really mean? Well, it means working with somebody else in order to achieve an outcome. So there are a number of different ways in which you might structure a JV. You have to think about what both parties would bring to the table, first of all. So what are the typical structures of JVs you might be talking about? So structure number 1 we might discuss is a bit of a classic. It's where one person is the investor and brings the money, and the other person brings the delivery. So perhaps they just bring the building expertise, so they can deliver a project from scratch. So an old house, then refurbed to brand new. Someone, of course, within that structure is still going to need to bring the deal. And this is where you're going to need to get that structure right. So the vast majority of people go into these JVs with an idea that what's fair is a 50-50 split, but what has to then be brought to the table needs to be of equal value. So there might be an issue if, for example, one person is bringing just money and the other person is bringing all the deals, all the work, all the expertise, and all the rest of it. Now, it doesn't mean that can't work as a 50-50 split. It just means that you're going to have a think about, what does that then mean on the ground? Does the person bring the money and put the money in and take no investment return on their money, but just provide interest-free capital? If so, how much are they providing, and over what sort of timescale are they providing that capital? Because that's not an easy thing to necessarily determine. And likewise, if someone is bringing the deals and the delivery, are they putting all their time in for free? Are they taking any consideration for those deals? Because how much legwork is that taking? Are they getting paid anything for any of that? Are they is a third party bringing deals in and you're buying deals from somebody else, from a sourcer or something like that? All those levels of complexity are going to need to be considered. Now, I'm not saying those sorts of JVs don't work. They absolutely do. I know quite a few that do work in that way when they've worked out what each party is going to do. And also there's that feeling, understanding of what everyone's going to do, and that feeling of fairness, because that feeling of fairness is going to be really important. Otherwise the JV is going to break down over the years. So understanding what each party is bringing to the table, having an idea of what everybody's role is, and also understanding how often you're going to communicate, on what media are you going to communicate. If one of you is kind of laissez-faire and just says, yeah, just sort of get on with it, no worries at all, and the other person wants to have a meeting every 2 minutes and wants everything annotated or recorded, or perhaps as an investor needs an update once a week, or whenever they want to pull an update, so there's going to be tons and tons of messages exchanged. Perhaps the investor's a little bit nervous because maybe they're abroad, maybe they're just extremely busy and they can't see what's going on. Is that going to be a good fit? Is that going to work? Some would say if there's not that trust there in the first place, it's not going to work. But of course, everybody likes different levels of detail. Everybody has different expectations. So again, these things need to be set up front. And you start to understand that these partnerships actually become more like a relationship, and perhaps even a marriage style when you're getting together with someone in business, if you want it to work out. So there always needs to be that understanding of what everyone's bringing to the table on the way in. Do you fall into what can be a potential trap of 2 of you who particularly get on reasonably well, just bringing almost exactly the same thing to the table? In which case, the difficult question you've got to answer early on is, what's the point of the JV? Does someone just want to put the same amount of money in as you? If they're putting the same amount of money in, are they also putting the same amount of effort in? It's understandable that people might want everybody involved to have skin in the game, And again, that's a JV structure that can work. Can everybody put money in, but everybody brings something different to the table? Perhaps one partner is good at bringing deals or has another business that brings deals in and puts deals on the table, for example, and one is particularly strong at asset management and brings skills to the table in terms of management. Perhaps they bring people to the table in terms of an existing operation and skills that they can add to the table. Perhaps one is particularly good at delivery and it has got an advantage in, or perhaps they're good at structuring leases, perhaps they're good at an ongoing strategic level of management, which can be quite different from a day-to-day level of property management, and both have, and tenancy management, all of those things have different skill sets and they take different levels of effort at different points in the process. So again, these things can work, but you need to think about all of these things. And actually the 4 pillars framework is a good one, because what it will do is it will enable you to think about exactly which of those you need to think about and who is doing those jobs. And if you aren't going to nail down from the start who's doing what job, guess what? You're probably going to find yourself doing it, and that's not ideal. I've been involved in a number of joint ventures where certainly in the early days those things haven't been mapped out particularly well, or things have changed. So perhaps you've got someone, again, something I've got involved in, where both people have agreed to put time in up front, and then time changes for one party. So perhaps they have to, life happens to them, things change. They can't afford to manage the properties for free anymore. So you're going to need to come to some kind of agreement about what you're going to do about property management. Are you going to use an agency? Which agency? How are you going to determine what you should be paying? People still need to manage agents. It's not like agents can just be left to get on with things and that's the end of it. It's still an asset that you've got to think about. And ultimately, an agency is not going to perform, certainly a vanilla property agency is not going to perform a full asset management service for you. They might well manage the tenancies and manage the property with a level of skill, but they might not be able to do an awful lot more than that. So you need to think about that. So with JVs, you're going to have to think about how you get into them, and also by definition, how you get out of them. What sort of level of insurance are you going to have for key people within the JV? Again, it can be a legit business expense. It can be well worthwhile. What's the JV trying to achieve in terms of the size of the portfolio it's going to buy? What financial commitment are people making over what period of time? What targets do you have? What KPIs does that joint venture have? What is the point of it existing? These are all the tough questions that are going to need to be answered. So I do get continually worried when I see people meet someone at a property meeting and just get on with a JV. You need skill sets that are complementary, I think, that look different, that feed into one, that are going to make a good and powerful ongoing JV. And you also need to understand, you get involved with people, they might decide there's going to be a big change in their lifestyle. Perhaps they're going to move offshore. Perhaps that's something that they've been considering doing, or they weren't considering doing, but a big lifestyle change happens and you're 2 or 3 years into something quite serious, and then suddenly that completely changes the parameters of it. Well, how are you going to work through that? Because there are things that's going to change apart from anything else in terms of tax reporting positions, in terms of accessibility to finance and things like that. So you're going to need to deal with that sort of stuff. You're going to need to understand how the JV is going to be wound up. So you're probably going to want a shareholders agreement. Again, if you don't have an official one, you've still got one. It's going to be pretty by default, de facto. It's up to you to manage that relationship. And in order to do that effectively, the shareholders agreement is the equivalent of a will or a prenup or something like that. It's a pretty serious heavyweight document that is going to consider what happens if the worst happens, what happens if one of the partners passes away, what happens if one person wants to exit and the other doesn't, what happens if you disagree and you have a dispute or a deadlock, what happens in the event of a deadlock, especially if it's a 50-50 where partner A thinks this and partner B thinks this. Is someone else brought in to arbitrate that arbitrarily? How do you decide who that person is or that organisation is? Is that all predetermined? What does it look like if one wants to sell and one wants to hold, for example, in an investment company? You can see all these serious things that you need to think about. So that is JVs, joint ventures, in a very quick video about them. I honestly believe you should spend as much time thinking about them as you do in any business partnership or in any serious relationship partnership decision you might make in life. Because remember, they need to add value to both sides. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. It's going to be pointless. It's going to be frustrating. With JVs, and I've done an awful lot of JVs, you often find you need to work harder to achieve the same results. But what can it also do for you, and what's the positive side of things? The positive side is ultimately that you can achieve much more scale, much more quickly than you would have been if you'd done these things on your own. So hope you enjoyed that video. Thank you.